Now, the BuckeyeXtra podcast with Joey Kaufman and Rob Oller from the Columbus Dispatch.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to a new edition of the BuckeyeXtra football podcast. I'm Joey Kaufman, joined by Rob Oller. A fair bit of Ohio State news for January. We're recording this on January 28th as of this date. Ohio State is in the process of hiring Arthur Smith, previously the Pittsburgh Steelers offensive coordinator, for the same job at Ohio State, where he would be the Ohio State offensive coordinator and play caller. And also yesterday, January 27th, a Tuesday, the Buckeyes found out their schedule for next season, at least the dates for the games. The opponents were finalized, but visit us at dispatch.com and you can see the full breakdown of the schedule. We'll talk about both of these sort of developments here, get into it all. At first blush, the schedule on paper appears to be significantly more demanding than it was a year ago. I'll go through it here rather quickly, but you knew the dates of the three non-conference games. The conference schedule begins Illinois, September 26th, October 3rd at Iowa. That's their first Big Ten road game. Maryland at home on October 10th. Then a trip to Indiana on October 17th. They have an off week of the 24th, and then at USC, Oregon at home, Northwestern at home, at Nebraska, a trip to Lincoln before the game against Michigan. So a fair number of teams were pretty good last year. Oregon, Indiana were two playoff teams. So they sort of headlined the schedule. And, of course, gave Michigan and other teams who ended last season ranked as well.
And Iowa's no easy place to play. That can be challenging going to Iowa City, which they haven't been since 2017. Is that right?
Correct. It'll be almost a decade.
Wow. Yeah. So they'll earn their pay this year, the Buckeyes, with that schedule. And you had some numbers in terms of switching out teams and teams they switched in, the records. It's pretty significant.
Yeah, one way I think you can look at the schedule is there are only two teams that are constants between 2025 and 2026. That's Illinois and Michigan. Both of those teams remain on the schedule. Then
Texas. We forgot about Texas.
I'm counting the conference draw.
Okay.
Yes, it's no doubt Texas is sort of a headliner of the non-conference slate. But among the conference teams, opponents, you have 7 which are new, 7 which go out, and the 7 new teams had a combined record of 65 and 30 last year. All of them but Maryland had a winning record. And then they're swapping out for 7, which were a combined 38 and 49. So rosters do turn over. I think that's important to keep in mind. It's hard to sort of project what teams ultimately look like because everybody at this time a year ago thought Penn State was going to be a sort of a huge game on the Ohio State schedule. It didn't play out that way. But looking at it on paper and how these teams were last year, the schedule, the 7 new teams are significantly more challenging. 6 of the 9 conference opponents ended last season ranked at the coaches poll as well. Very few soft stretches in the schedule, and they had that last year. Even if Penn State was what people expected Penn State was going to be in the preseason, you still had this stretch in November, Purdue, UCLA, Rutgers, that was going to give you sort of a little bit of a ramp up to the Michigan game. They don't have that this year at all.
Yeah, which begs the question of how much does that help or hurt? 3 gimmies leading up to Michigan last year probably allowed Ohio State to play better against Michigan. But did they get hurt in the playoff, having not really faced a high quality opponent? You could argue even Michigan really wasn't high quality. They were going through a lot of drama at that point. Sharon Moore about to go into custody. Anyhow, it's a different ball game this year, and it's a minefield. Just from my seat, it seems like an undefeated regular season would be asking a lot.
Yeah, asking a lot. It would seem very difficult to beat 12-0. To me, if you're Ohio State, I think the way I would look at this, assuming these teams are what we think they're going to be, you almost just want to sort of be of the mindset, just make the playoff, just get into the tournament. You'll be battle tested, and maybe it plays in their favor because that was, I think, potentially a thing that hurt them this past year was they got to the Indiana game, they got to the Miami game, and they never faced a pass rush like either of those two teams. And granted, they ended up playing in the final. So really high level competition, but I think the way the schedule picked up was just so drastic for them. You had a young quarterback in Julian Sain who maybe wasn't accustomed to seeing that sort of pass rush and being under that kind of pressure. So I don't know how well the schedule prepared them. It gave them a chance at times to rest players and to allow them to recover for some injuries like Carnell Tate and Jeremiah Smith and try to be as close to full strength as possible. But I think the flip side of that is I'm not sure how well served they were in terms of their preparation. So this schedule, I think it is a gauntlet, but the if you're a glass half full person, it's a well maybe it will allow you to be a little more battle tested for when you do get in the postseason. The glass half empty side of it is if you want to go out and really make a bold prediction, say I don't know if they can make the playoff with the schedule. I think that might be drastic, but it certainly I don't think it's totally inconceivable. It's certainly hard to imagine Ohio State ever missing the playoff with the way they've constructed the roster and how well Ryan Day's built the program. But there are certainly teams that are high quality teams who can make the playoff in their own right. So it certainly looks formidable, that's for sure.
Well, to your point, let's look at who probably what 1 and 2. I don't know in the preseason rankings. Ohio State will be up there, but so will Texas. Texas will be just like as it was last year, and the Longhorns kind of sputtered early, and then kind of got it together and thought maybe they'd have a shot to make the playoff, and maybe they'd have been dangerous if they'd have gotten in, just like Notre Dame, which I thought probably deserved to be in, but. So you got to go to Texas the second week, September 12th. So if you lose that game, and that's no slam dunk, you're going down to Austin, you're playing, you're playing a good Longhorns team, which will be ranked top 5. Return Mr. Manning, Arch. Now he didn't play well this last year, but maybe he will, it'll be their probably second game, I'm guessing. Anyhow, the point being, you could lose that game, and then you need to not lose more than one more, maybe. I mean, Notre Dame, I don't think has a 3-loss team gotten in?
No.
No 3-loss teams gotten in. So you look at this again, this minefield. You've got Texas. Okay, then you go Kent State win, Illinois win, at Iowa probably win, I would think. Maryland win, at Indiana, all bets off. Let's say you lose that. You got 2 losses. Let's just say you have 2 losses after, I'm not predicting this, I'm just saying. So you got 2 losses after Indiana. Then you have a week off. Then you go to USC. That's a must win all of a sudden. I think Ohio State wins it, but the record of teams going to the West Coast is not great. Ohio State did win at Washington this past year. Then you got Oregon home. So another must win. Northwestern at Nebraska. Northwestern's a win. At Nebraska, probably a win. Michigan, who knows? You have them home. I guess my point is the Texas game might be more. I think the Texas game is more important this year than last year. Last year, you could have lost Texas. They ended up 12-0 in the regular season. So even if they're 11-1, they make the playoff. The Texas game, I think, is bigger this year. It's not the opener, but it's more important for playoff ramifications.
Yes. Yeah. Because the way the schedule played out
Right.
last year. I think you thought Penn State, Michigan would be better last year. So it felt very important because it gave you the cushion for those 2 games. Those are your 3 bellwether games.
Yeah. That's
year,
fair. But in hindsight, as it worked out, it wasn't that huge of a game.
Well,
and this year, I think will be.
And I think this year too, you think of it as having sort of 4 bellwether games: Texas, Indiana, Oregon, and Michigan. And then it
Right.
depends maybe how you feel about USC, which is probably the wild card in this slate. They've been very hot and cold in Lincoln Riley's tenure, but he does have an experienced second-year quarterback in Jaden Maiava. And you go to the West Coast, and you have Lincoln Riley with a veteran quarterback who's shown to have some high ceilings. That just can be sort of a pain to play a week before you host Oregon. And USC USA Today's way too early poll had them 12th, which seems high, but I mean it's not too hard to envision them being better with Maya. We'll kind of see, but that sort of feels like a game where if USC ends up being a 7-5 team, or USC's a 10-2, 9-3 team, that sort of changes the way you look at the schedule. The late October to early November stretch, I think, is probably where things will swing because you're at Indiana October 17th. They do get an off week before the trip out to LA to play USC, and then you're home against Oregon. I mean that feels, to sweep those games would be difficult, but yeah, I think you probably just hope to get 2 out of 3 there.
Yeah, and at Iowa is no gimme. I mean, they
Oh,
lost.
Illinois was last year too.
They lost the last time they went to Iowa.
Yeah,
So, that was a shocking upset. Unranked Iowa beat Ohio State. It was Urban Meyer's team. I don't foresee that, but I guess what we're saying is I think 2 losses is not out of the question. And if you're not careful, you could lose 3 and then be out of the playoff.
yeah. That's how it looks. There just isn't a stretch on the schedule where they play a truly terrible bottom feeder in a row, where you're playing Wisconsin or Purdue last year, were 2 of the worst teams in the conference. You don't play that. There is not a stretch of the Ohio State's conference schedule where you play anybody back-to-back weeks who had losing records last year. Maryland's the only conference opponent you have that had a losing record in 25. And granted, things can change, and maybe Nebraska really bottoms out next year under Matt Rule for some reason, or Northwestern really has trouble. Both of those teams were 7-6 last year, so it's not as if they were elite by any means. And Iowa was ranked at the end of the season, but maybe their offense regresses. So you got to keep those variables in mind. And I think in this era of college football too, it's so hard to really, I think, prognosticate in the preseason, because in the past you would just look at, okay, how many returning starters does this team have? Well, they bring back most of their starters. They're probably going to be pretty good, and that was generally a safe bet. But now there's so much roster turnover and so many portal departures. I mean, Ohio State, half their roster from this past season is gone. So you have 28 newcomers via the freshman class and 17 newcomers via the transfer portal. And other teams are sort of in a similar boat where just there's so much movement. I think it gets harder to maybe pick and project. So that's an important caveat to keep in mind. But we're just trying to kind of piece together what we sort of know based on just how these programs have been as of late.
Exactly. The other thing you look down this schedule, let's look at returning starting quarterbacks. You've got Arch Manning, Texas, Illinois. Don't.
I think Allmar's gone.
Yeah, he's gone. Yeah, at Iowa. But anyhow, let's look at the teams that are.
That's what makes that 3-game stretch in late October really
right. You got
daunting, is because you have Indiana lost Mendoza, but they went out and added TCU transfer for Josh Hoover, experienced veteran quarterback. USC brings back Maiava, and Oregon was able to convince Dante Moore to stay in school and not declare for the NFL draft. So he's back as well for Oregon. I think that's significant. So those 3 teams have been really good, and their quarterbacks either are back or they found somebody who was able to who's been experienced in Hoover.
Yeah, and Michigan brings back Bryce Underwood.
Yeah.
So that adds to the angst a little bit.
Yeah, Nebraska will not bring back Dylan Holloway. He's now going to be the Oregon backup quarterback.
Yeah, I don't know. We'll see. Again, going into last year, like you said, Penn State thought Penn State was going to be all that and ended up not being that. So who's this year's Penn State? Could it be Indiana? Could Indiana regress? I don't know. I don't really see that happening, but are they going to be what they were this year? I would doubt it. Yeah, they've got I mean, Mendoza he was kind of a generational talent for them. Not sure that the TCU kid is going to be all that. We'll see. I mean, Hoover was probably the most sought after QB, right, in the portal.
Yeah,
Yeah, Josh Hoover, who left TCU's for
yeah,
yeah for Indiana.
he was up there. Even like Maryland, I know Maryland was really not great last year, but they had a freshman quarterback in Malik Washington, who was somebody who sort of was maybe an up and coming guy. He was broke some freshman passing records for them. Was sort of a really heralded guy. Maybe he takes another step forward. Although I wouldn't expect Maryland to come into Ohio State be that daunted. But just the point is, I think with the schedule, even your worst teams, if you have to strain to beat them, it affects you the following week. It just sort of adds up. It's the accumulation. I mean, there were teams last year like Wisconsin and Purdue. They were just so hapless, and it never felt like they had any sort of shot. If a team can test you a little bit, I think it impacts you the following week. So you play Maryland before you play Indiana. Okay, Maryland doesn't pose much of an upset threat, but if they strain you a little more, I think it impacts your prep for certainly Indiana the next week.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a fun season from a fan standpoint, of just an interest standpoint. You don't have that Purdue, Wisconsin, Purdue, Northwest. You just don't have the uh, or the Rutgers. I'm sorry, not Northwestern, Rutgers, that they just blew through last year and gives a false sense of security, I guess. At USC, that one intrigues me. That's going to be really an interesting game and potentially a really big game. If things go south at Texas and at Indiana, then you go to SC the week before Oregon. A lot of pressure on that game.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
Potential.
which is conceivable because it's conceivable they lose to Texas and Indiana. Then you're staring at a stretch where you have a bye week, and then you have a 5 game stretch where you're at USC, Oregon, Northwestern, at Nebraska, then Michigan. Then you assuming 10-2 is the bar you need to hit, then you have to go 5-0 second half of the season.
Right.
Some of this I will say we knew kind of going in this was gonna be a hard schedule because the opponents were made or have been public for some years. Yeah, we didn't know the dates. I do think in terms of the way the schedule lined up by the conference, they probably helped Ohio State out as much as they could. You get a bye before you go to the West Coast. That's helpful. The bye is sort of in the middle of the season. That's probably helpful. They only have one bye this year. It's the 13-week regular season, not a 14-week. So you only have the one bye. Labor Day is later this year. So I think probably the schedule lined up as well as it could have. Maybe you would want Indiana to be flip-flop with Maryland, but then you're playing Indiana on the heels of Illinois and Iowa. So I don't know if that's all that better. And you would have had a back-to-back in that case. They don't have back-to-back road games in consecutive weeks. At Indiana and USC are back-to-back games, but there's a bye week in between. So you're not having a stretch where you're making 2 road trips in the span of 2 weeks. That's helpful. It's a tough schedule, but I don't think the schedule makers made any, I guess, extra onerous for the Buckeyes.
Yeah, and this isn't happen in a vacuum. I mean, Indiana plays Ohio State and Michigan back to back.
Mm-hmm.
So, Indiana's got their hands full, and who knows? I think they play Michigan after Ohio State.
I believe that's great. Yeah.
I think so. So, they don't. not everybody's got it tough, but we're looking at it just through the lens of Ohio State's who they have before and after games, and other teams face, tough goes also. So
Michigan's another wild card to the schedule. We talked about USC, but just what does
yeah,
Michigan look like with Whittingham? Is there a drop off at all? Does he end up being as good as he was at Utah, or does he end up being kind of like Rich Rodriguez, didn't fit culturally and things fall apart? I think maybe somewhere in between, but that's another wild card in the schedule where it feels like Michigan could be 9-3, 10-2, or they could be 7-5.
yeah, absolutely. I think one thing that needs to happen is Julian Sand needs to improve, and he had a really good redshirt freshman campaign last year, but there's little areas where he can improve, and it may help as we transition here, unless there's more to be said about this schedule, to
Arthur Smith, the
Arthur Smith, or Artie Smith, as my Pittsburgh Steelers friend referred to him. Art, I guess they're on a
how
first
did
name.
your Steelers friend feel about Arthur Smith?
That's a great question. The skinny on that thinks he's good. Actually, he's taking. I know a lot of Buckeye fans. It wasn't a sexy hire, but from my Steelers fan, he said, "Well, the offense. Yeah, people think that the Steelers' offense wasn't great, but it was better these past 2 years than it was before that." So he said, "I think he's solid. I think that he is good with the run game, which we can get into." And his only question was he's not real dynamic, but as you've written, Artie Smith may not have to recruit, at least not extensively. He may not have to be like the guy that, convinces players to come. He might be in the film room, X's and O's, and coming up with offensive schemes and game plans, and leave the recruiting to others. That was the one knock on him, I guess, from my Pittsburgh buddy, is
Yeah,
that he's not real exciting.
well, I guess from just the way a staff construction standpoint, maybe we can start there. So Ohio State lost Brian Hartline. He was one of the 10 primary assistant coaches under Ryan Day. They lose him. So now you have 9 assistants left, and they replace him with Cortez Hankton, wide receivers coach, who was hired January 1st. He's the new wide receivers coach. So you're at 10 coaches right there, and Arthur Smith would be the 11th coach, which is one more than teams typically carry. But there are no longer any limits on the size of your staff. So you can have as many guys coaching and practice and games as you want. The only limitation that remains in place under the NCAA rules is only 10 can go on the road recruiting. Typically, before this rule change, you had 9 or 10 assistant coaches who would be your countable assistants, who could be the ones who could only coach a practice and games and be on the recruiting trail. Now you can have more coaching during the week and on Saturdays. So you can allow you to do something like this with Arthur Smith, where you bring him in as the play caller, and he may not be out on the road recruiting. He's just gonna be your guy scheming up plays, and doesn't have a position coach either, which the Ohio State offensive coordinator has typically had. Chip Kelly coached the running backs for Hartline, and then Kevin Wilson was the tight ends coach. So he's going to be kind of like Patricia, where he's just seeing the offense at large without being tied to a position group.
Head coach of the offense, as Ryan Day likes to say, with Patricia being head coach of the defense. I guess Ryan Day then becomes head coach of the head coaches.
Although maybe I wonder if that designation will continue with the offense, or does he kind of keep that a little closer to the vest? Maybe
I don't know. That's going to be interesting. What Day's input. He's always going to have input in the offense in terms of game day. It runs through his headset. He can say, I don't want that, or we need to run the ball more. I mean, kind of big concept stuff is usually how the head coach handles it. So we'll see how that works. But I think if the run game improves, not that it was horrible, but it wasn't super dynamic. this past season. I think Bo Jackson is legit. Um, so if Art Smith can scheme it up so that they're a little more dangerous running the ball, that would only help Sayin. And the other thing that he's good at is play action. Art Smith's he was big on play action with the Steelers and where he's been, and potentially moving the pocket, which I think would be a real upside going into 2026 if they would move the pocket a little more with Sayin. And I think as we saw against Indiana and especially Miami, they didn't really move the pocket that much, even with the Hurricanes pass rush. And Sayin was just kind of a sitting duck back there. And I think he got a little flummoxed early and maybe never totally recovered from the pressure that Miami brought. Miami's very good defense. So it's not like, the offensive line fell apart, but there were weak spots, especially I would say, on the right side. So if Arthur Smith can come in and get some concepts, maybe a little more creative, get Sayin moving a little more, that would only be a positive in my view.
It does sort of remind you of the Chip Kelly hire when you remove sort of the Chip Kelly Ryan Day friendship from over the years and mentorship, but in terms of just their schematic similarities, in terms of just what they were well versed in. Chip Kelly was someone who at UCLA had really picked up their run game, was somebody who I think did a lot for Ohio State in the red zone, and those are some of the boxes that Arthur Smith checks. And I think the hope for Ohio State is that you could enhance those areas, and those would pair nicely with what sort of Ryan Day's offenses have been best at, which is the vertical passing game, being able to connect on deep shots. And that was, I think, just a huge issue for them last year, is they were able to uncork these great deep shots to Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate, but then they would get deep down in the red zone and they would squander some of those opportunities. So if they can bring in Arthur Smith and sort of help Ohio State capitalize in some of those situations, I think that would be well needed, because when you write the season obituary for Ohio State in 2025, I think one of the leading causes of their season ending in the quarterfinals was the lack of ability to punch in scoring opportunities deep down in the red zone. You saw it against Indiana, where they had those two drives and they got no points out of it. And certainly their inability to contain Miami's pass rush was an issue, but probably if that's 1A, 1B was the red zone.
Yeah, and I just don't remember, watching these NFL games the last few weeks, supposedly immobile or not super mobile quarterbacks still had that ability to run for important yards, first down yards. And especially, I mean, I may have missed this, but it doesn't seem like Ohio State bootlegged Sayin very often. Like, he was mainly shotgun drop back. There wasn't a lot of bootleg calls where he just is out looking into the flats to see what's available out there. And again, that really would have helped in the playoff, but I would expect to see a little more of that. I mean, these coaches are not dopes. They see what kind of didn't work and what needs to improve. And unless they're super stubborn and hard-headed, I think you would not look at 2025 Ohio State quarterback situation and not think, well, we've got to get him. He's got to be able to scramble a little bit more than he did. So I would expect that to happen, especially with Smith. But we'll see.
Yeah, I think what's also just notable about this whole hire is I think we've seen in Ryan Day's tenure an ability to sort of self-correct a little bit, especially with his coaching hires. You saw it after Brian Hartline, where he went in the first time he kept play calling in 23. Had an inexperienced offensive coordinator after losing Kevin Wilson. Then he goes back to hiring an experienced coordinator first with Bill O'Brien, and then Chip Kelly weeks later, and then they give it back to Hartline. The results are mixed, and he made sure he didn't sort of repeat that and went out and hired somebody, Arthur Smith, who'd been a play caller for multiple years in the NFL with the Tennessee Titans in 2019 and 20 as a head coach of the Falcons, and then last year's with the Steelers. So that's something I think he's done well at, where you didn't sort of see him delegate to another first time play caller. He went out and made sure he found somebody who's done it before.
Yeah, very important. He loves those NFL guys, which, have worked out pretty well for him, at least with Patricia last year, and now we'll see with Arthur Smith.
Yeah, his defensive play callers, the only one who didn't have NFL experience was Jim Knowles, and on the offensive side of the ball, Hartline has been his only play caller without NFL experience. So that has been sort of the flavor for him, certainly going to the NFL and getting somebody has a background there. This is now they have an offensive and defensive coordinator who were former NFL head coaches and coordinators, and Patricia and Smith.
And it would seem, even though there was some discussion, even on this podcast, of whether Matt Patricia would return, it seems all but certain. I don't know. Maybe I guess. I mean, that he would remain with Ohio State and not jump to the NFL. I think we talked about maybe Patricia being similar to the Chip Kelly, a one and done, make a name for himself. And then if there was the right job opening in the NFL, I would assume a defensive coordinator job, that he might jump at that. But to this point, I have not seen his name linked anywhere, and he seems content or happy to be coaching the Buckeyes.
He had been most closely linked, just sort of name thrown out there, with the Cowboys defensive coordinator job, but they ended up hiring somebody else. The thing to watch in this cycle is there were just so many NFL head coaching vacancies, and so you wondered, would one tempt Matt Patricia to go back to the NFL? But he's under contract with Ohio State, so he's certainly able to come back, and I wouldn't be surprised if he got a pay raise to do so. So it would totally depend on what sort of job materialized or what his options ended up being from the NFL, and who wants to pursue him. And Chip Kelly found a fit in the Raiders last year, maybe not schematically from an X's and O's football perspective, but financially it was they threw a lot of money at him.
And now he's back with the Northwestern Wildcats.
Well, he'll be back in Ohio Stadium next November 14th, when Northwestern comes to Ohio Stadium.
We would assume he'd still be employed at that point.
So his first visit to Ohio Stadium since the Tennessee game.
Oh yeah. Anyhow, Arthur Smith, I think Buckeye Nation's warming to him, because I think they like this idea of, hey, run game coordinator, and that's kind of what we need. Maybe work in tandem with the offensive line, make sure that that's up to snuff, and maybe giving a little breathing room to Julian Sayin, so it's not just this vertical passing game, and especially, as you mentioned, down in the red zone, where that vertical passing game disappears, and you have to grind it out. And I think you have to be more creative down there. I mean, Brian Hartline had never really done it, and I'm not saying it was a disastrous season, but play calling is a mix of gift, he just kind of intuitive, and learned. And I don't think he had a lot of time to learn it, and I'm guessing that he won't learn it down at South Florida, because he'll have somebody else calling plays. And then he got distracted. You have to think he got distracted when he got the South Florida job, and how focused was he on the scheming and the play calling for Ohio State in the playoff. But mostly just, he was learning on the job. He was as they say, trying to fly the airplane as he was building it. And that probably wasn't the best setup. And Ryan Day, as you pointed out, kind of corrected the situation.
It course corrected. I think it was important for them to find somebody who had called plays before. They didn't really have an internal option.
Right.
Tyler Bowen had been an offensive coordinator at Virginia Tech, but I think Ryan Day is still new to this. I mean, he only started giving up play calling in 24. He had been the primary play caller for his first 5 years as the head coach, and he sort of made a conscious decision to give it up to sort of take that CEO style approach. And I think it helped them in 24 because he was able to be involved in the defense and help them make changes. And I think it's helpful for just the roster management piece, the game management piece. There's just so much more that goes into being a head coach in this day and age. So I think to go back to that would have not been positioning Ohio State to be at its best moving forward. I think it would have probably strained Day a little more. And so I think just finding somebody with experience was important. And maybe you see things on Arthur Smith's resume that you like or don't like, but still, I think it's important for them to have somebody of that stature in the building who certainly organized an offense and called plays. And it felt like every year where Ohio State's been at its best, it's had somebody else in the offensive staff who they could lean on. It was Kevin Wilson early on. The time it was Chip Kelly, and so I think it's important for them to have somebody. And Arthur Smith's only 43 too, so he's not as if he's like this guy who's been doing it for that long, but he's been an NFL coordinator for multiple years in the last decade. So I think certainly in terms of the options that they had, he's very experienced.
Yeah, plus his dad founded FedEx. So there's a lot of money out there, a lot of NIL money. Although apparently family members cannot donate NIL money to the program. I know there's been a lot of talk out there of, well, can dip into the FedEx stash to, or they want to support the FedEx I don't know what we'd call him, legend of what do you call when he's not a protege. Anyhow,
I'll say what's funny about Arthur Smith too is Ryan Day would have had several references for him because Will Howard was a backup quarterback for the Steelers this past year. Jerry Fields was the quarterback for the Steelers the previous year and had a pretty good year playing for Arthur Smith. Mike Vrabel was the head coach who made Arthur Smith his offensive coordinator when Smith had his best season in 2020. So Vrabel was also somebody who played for Matt Patricia and was a reference for Patricia when he got the job last year. So there's some football connections that have, I think, helped Dave fill out his staff there.
I know what I was saying. Arthur Smith is a FedEx legacy.
There you go.
Legacy. So
maybe FedEx will be give a nice sum of money for the jersey patch because
oh yeah, there you go. That's a real possibility. Anyhow, I think it's a solid hire. It's maybe not splashy.
I think you don't think it's splashy. I mean, they hired a guy from the NFL who I think largely looked at for offensive coordinator jobs in the NFL.
I think people look at the Steelers offense and thought, meh, it wasn't like high octane. And so they're not super impressed by what he did there. Although when he was at Tennessee, they had really good offenses.
Yeah, the 2020 Titans. If you want to sort of talk yourself more and more into the Arthur Smith hire, you'd play the tape from that year.
Yeah,
Derrick Henry was a 2,000-yard rusher, and they did a lot of good stuff. He's never had a great quarterback, though. I mean, like with the Steelers, his quarterback was an aging Aaron Rodgers and Justin Fields, who I think has had his difficulties at times, certainly in the NFL. So he's never had these top shelf All Pro NFL quarterbacks.
Right.
So I think it just the NFL is different. I know he didn't have the biggest outside of the
Didn't,
Titans run. He didn't. The Falcons or the Steelers weren't top of the NFL
didn't,
in scoring, but
didn't he have Matt Ryan though?
no,
We didn't with the Falcons.
no, no. It was
Okay.
like Marcus Mariota.
Oh, gee. Okay. Enough said there. Yeah, I mean, I don't know how flashy splashy it is, but I think it's solid. I think it's a B plus higher at least. And
Oh, you're take it
we'll
back.
see how this run game, pass
You
game
did have
thing.
Matt Ryan in 21.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
he did have a pretty good
one
quarterback.
year of Matt Ryan, then Mariota, then Desmond Ritter.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not. I don't think his name is the flashiest to Ohio State.
No, well, Smith,
Yeah.
Art Smith, that just doesn't jump off the page.
No, and it's not like Chip Kelly was a very splashy hire because also
Right.
in the way that they poached this power four head coach to come be a coordinator, and somebody who I think revolutionized football in the 2010s. So Arthur Smith isn't that, but I think it's a very good hire because he does what Ohio State needs him to do: call plays and be an experienced offensive coordinator,
He
and
fits.
have a background that complements Ryan Day.
Yeah. And come full circle, if he'll have his hands full with this schedule.
Yeah,
We'll see how it goes, and gets thrown into the deep end a little bit early with after Ball State going down to Austin and Texas. Again, everyone's talking about the Big Ten schedule, and as they should. It's a meat grinder, but a Texas game looms large.
and it's sandwiched between two MAC schools there, Ball State and Kent State.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's I think the other thing too about college football, the games, it felt this way, but against both Indiana and Miami, they're slower pace with the clock rules, and so to have a coordinator with an NFL background and game management, you just have to maximize drives more and be efficient, and it's I think become a little bit of a slower game.
Do you think the Buckeyes will speed things up? I mean, they were toward the very bottom in number of plays last season, if I
Yeah,
remember correctly. I mean, I think that they saw that maybe
but even
again,
even if
will there be a course correction with that? I mean, you're limited somewhat, but you don't have to be, out of 100 and whatever 20 teams, you don't have to be 113th or something.
no, you don't. But I even think if you are a faster paced team, college football does not look like it did in the previous
Yeah.
decade where you had Baylor and Chip Kelly, Oregon, Lincoln Riley, Oklahoma, where it felt like every team in the country could score 50 points in a given weekend. It feels less like a Big 12 style sport, more of an NFL style sport where the margins are tighter. And maybe it's just because the postseason's longer and those are the last two games we saw, but it certainly has felt that way lately. And I think the scoring totals nationally bear that out as well. But I think that pretty much covers it around Ohio State for the latest news. Schedule's out, new offensive coordinator as we bring January to close here. That was Rob Oller. I'm Joey Kaufman. Thanks for joining us on the Buckeye Extra Football Podcast.